Hello and welcome to Ear Read This, where today we are talking about The Wind in the Willows by Kenneth Grahame. My name's Ash.
And my name's Adam.
How are you doing, Adam?
I'm okay.
This continues our track of talking about slightly picaresque novels.
This one, I think, was one that we'd picked before we realised it could fit into the theme we were exploring.
And how well.
Yes. There are many aspects and factors of this that we did not expect to fit in so well, but we'll get to that.
Well, beginning with the fact that Kenneth Grahame was born in Edinburgh.
Because of bloody course he was. I mean, which writers weren't born in Edinburgh at this point?
Exactly. 1859. So we could have, if we'd been bothered, worked out the actual day and made sure it hits, the 70th?
Anniversary of Wind in the Willows?
I don't know. We're not a maths podcast. Fuck it. Yeah, so I've been reading a little bit about Kenneth Grahame, mostly from the introduction to the Wind in the Willows edition I read. 200,000 words is his entire output of his whole career.
How many of those is Wind in the Willows?
Wind in the Willows, 4. But it's his only novel, I think.
Yeah.
It's
mostly short stories he wrote,
It's our first book for
Yeah.
children that we've done, unless you count 20,000 Leagues.
Is it? I think, should we get into whether or not it's for children now or later?
Let's get into it now.
Let's get into it now. Is it for children?
Yes.
Well,
I think primarily, I think it was intended for children.
He wrote it for children.
Well, he wrote it for a child. It came to be through letters he wrote to his son, whose nickname was My Dearest Mouse. Well, no, it was Mouse, but all the letters start My Dearest Mouse.
That's really nice.
And the
Kinda
letters are, I mean, almost verbatim some sections of Wind in the Willows. There's a little bit of tying together he does.
That's very Tolkien-like.
Yeah. So, I mean, it certainly had adult
Themes, definitely.
No, adult audience.
Yeah.
A big fan of it was Theodore Roosevelt,
Really?
who wrote to Kenneth Grahame saying,
I would love to hunt and kill all of the characters in your book.
Well, you would expect that, yeah. But he said, I've read it, I've reread it, and I've come to count these characters as close friends or something like that.
That's incredibly sweet.
I think he was pivotal in getting it published in the States
That's fantastic.
because it was a huge hit.
Well, my first introduction to Wind in the Willows was through
Adam, where did you first come across Wind in the Willows?
in a charity shop bin. No.
Oh, perfect.
I know. I first. It would have been. It was an animation. It was as an animation, and connected to that animation was an interactive PC game. But it wasn't like an actual video game. It was like sort of tableaus of the animated film. When you hovered over it, it would give you
That period.
Yeah, it would give you voiceovers of somebody reading the excerpts of the book that were related to that
Nice.
event. And I became quite obsessed with it as a child. And we had the audiobook, the
Was it an
BBC
18?
audiobook. Yeah, it was
Harder.
frequent sex and drug use.
Yeah.
But no, it was we had it in the car as an audiobook as well.
Oh yeah, we did as well.
I can still hear the sort of pipe music that was the theme tune in my head.
I can still hear Alan Bennett's voice reading it. Perfect voice.
It's a perfect voice for it.
Subject matter. A couple of other things about Kenneth. So it's published in 1908.
Yep.
Another thing I found is that the year before, and he's an odd character, Kenneth Grahame. He worked at a bank.
Yeah, and then he started writing when he left the bank, didn't he?
Yeah, but not in a sort of T.S. Eliot or Kafka-ish way, where writing was always the private life. He seems to have just worked at a bank, quit, and then decided,
I'm going to do a bit of writing.
I'll do a bit of writing. I think he did some earlier writing too, but he did say asked if he was a writer, he responded, no, I never have been and never will be, by the reason of the accident that I don't need any money.
Well, that's certainly... That's a pretty conclusive answer there.
He also said that he despised the idea of notoriety and found it distasteful. And
Kenneth.
He would never get any moment's rest if he became a writer. So it's a different age, an age of author stardom.
So this was him writing purely for his own interest then?
Yeah, or his son's.
Yeah.
But weirdly, the year before he started writing Wind in the Willows, a man called George Robinson, it's definitely Robinson, I can't remember if it's George, I think George Robinson, walks into his bank, asks to see Kenneth Grahame, hands him a big black manuscript, and says almost like a Christmas cracker, "Take one end of this." Kenneth Grahame does. The guy pulls out a gun and shoots at him 3 times. Manages to miss all 3 times, but after that, I think he quit the bank and began writing Wind in the Willows.
So it was a near-death experience that sort of triggered this. Yeah,
and perhaps gave him a dose that he might not have needed, but a dose of thinking how brutal and scary the outside world is.
Well, I think that's a very good start to where Wind in the Willows begins, with Molly's sick of doing his spring cleaning.
Yes. And he comes scrooging out of his burrow. This is scraping and scrooging.
Scraping. I love scrooging as a verb.
Scrooging as a verb, yeah. So yeah, Molly is living underground in his burrow, doing some spring cleaning. He can hear spring going on up above him, but he's
always been a little bit too afraid of the outside world to ever really see what the spring is all about.
Yeah, and he just, in a moment of complete
compulsion,
he scrooges his way out of his burrow. There are 4 key characters in The Wind in the Willows, and they are quite distinct. How would you describe Molly?
Well, they're all archetypal, and Molly is the archetypal fish out of water, lived a comfortable life. He's Bilbo. He's taken from his seat of comfort and thrust out into a world that he isn't quite prepared for, but finds out he's actually more suited to than he realizes. He's that sort of the meek adventurer archetype.
Yeah, and he's quite conflicted about the very idea of adventure, because he's very home comforty.
Yeah.
And he's also the animal that knows the animal world the least. So we get to
we're seeing it through his eyes.
Truffle into it through his nose.
Something I'd actually completely forgotten about was there are actually humans in this book.
We'll get to that.
Yeah.
Hold that thought, because that's a very peculiar thing. So there's Mole. He comes scrooging out of his burrow, and he sees a brown whiskered face that becomes the water rat, which is Ratty.
The water vole, actually.
Well, the water rat in this.
Oh, really?
Yeah. It's not Voley. Moley and Voley.
But he's a vole, but they call him Ratty.
Is that true?
Yeah. I thought he was a water vole.
He's got the character of a vole. I could see him being a vole. So why do they call him a rat?
This is the argument that ends the podcast.
No, I can see what you mean. He hasn't got any really ratty features. But then it's very peculiar because he takes pains to distinguish each of his characters as the mole, the rat, later the badger, the toad.
Well, the way I looked at it was that he'd made him not a rat because of all the negative connotations that a rat-like character would have.
But he couldn't call him Vole because Moly Voley.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
That's just the way I'd read it. I mean, it could be I was about to say a translation.
I mean, it makes no sense. I don't think there is such thing as a river rat. I'm not sure.
Do you want to do a podcast pause and a clean cut, and we'll come back with a definitive answer?
No, I think we've muddled through. I think I think you're probably right. There is a sea rat later, which also makes no sense.
No.
There's no sea rats. There's certainly no sea voles.
Well, I'm assuming what's meant by the sea rat is the kind of rat that would stow away on a ship, you know.
Yeah. So Ratty, also quite home comfortsy, but a bit more successful.
Well, he writes doggerel.
A bit of a gentleman, kind of dandyish in a way.
He's a sort of Georgian gentleman of leisure.
Yeah.
In a way. He has his sort of riverfront house. Yep. He enjoys the things that he enjoys.
And again, the river.
The river.
When Moley says it's nice, he says nice. It's the only thing.
Yes.
There's this telescoping of the world. There is the rat, the mole, the river.
Yes.
And there's no suggestion of
there might be another rat, there might be another river.
Exactly, yeah. First funny little connection to something we've talked about before.
Uh-huh.
Ratty has a brace of pistols that he goes to immediately when trouble beckons, just like Dr. Johnson wields in before going to Scotland.
Yeah, he's told to leave his weapons behind in case he incites another war.
Yeah, Scotland, the wild woods of the
frontier.
World. Yeah. Yeah, so Ratty's he's basically like the friend who's got his life together. Mole comes scrooging out of his hole, half blind, having lived on his own for too long, probably stinking,
Yeah.
and runs into this immaculate water rat or vole, who I see as wearing a kind of striped suit.
Yeah,
maybe a cane.
I always, in my head, he was always wearing a sort of tweed country suit. You know, he was in his element.
But no, tweed isn't summery enough. I think I think he needs that kind of bathing suit coloured.
Sure. Okay. Either way, whatever he's wearing, he's got pistols strapped to it.
He's definitely got pistols. Third character, Toad.
Toad
Provides the plot, which we'll get to. Toad really is the plot.
Toad of Toad Hall.
Toad of Toad Hall. He's rich.
He's
idle.
Idle. He got idle money, which he's frittering away on things.
Yeah, I think Rat is quite new money, whereas Toad is clearly old money.
If we're looking at telescoping of the world, then that's probably exactly what he was going for.
Yeah. He flits like a gadfly from
interest to interest.
Interest to interest.
First, there was some kind of sport. Was it croquet or?
There's a few. The first time we hear of him, and here's the second interesting little link.
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember Stephen Jarvis in our Pickwick episode telling us about that illustration of Mr. Pickwick on a punt?
Oh yeah,
The first reference to Toad is
a bit of a punt.
He was all about punting.
Yeah.
Punt of punt hole, more like. But he writes that off as, by the time we meet him, he's gone through a few more fads and is into
motor cars.
No, he's not.
Not yet.
He's into caravanning.
Caravanning, that's what it was.
There is a better word for that. It's not really a caravan. It's more like a big. I'm going to say gypsy caravan because there are literally gypsies in it.
Yes.
So I'm clear, aren't I?
Yeah. Well, I think I think if we're talking about primary sources, we've got to use what the primary source is.
Yeah.
Because I don't think there exists a modern equivalent of whatever.
We might run into a road bump with that policy if we start doing the works of Conrad.
If we run into a road bump, all the spokes will come off our wooden wheels as well.
Yeah, that's true. Nice to get us back on track.
Yeah.
And he is, he's clearly got quite an addictive personality. There is when his friends intervene, and when his motor car
stage an actual intervention,
literal intervention, and when he's locked away, he does seem to kind of have withdrawal symptoms, or he seems like a child who's denied
a toy,
video games or something.
Well, it's like he just uses various things lying around to pretend he's driving his car.
Yeah. In fact, I've got a reading.
I'm reading.
So Ratty, Moley, and Badger have locked him up in his own house.
For his own good.
He's under house arrest, basically, and they're keeping watch on him. Each animal took it in turns to sleep in Toad's room at night, and they divided the day up between them. At first, Toad was undoubtedly very trying to his careful guardians. When his violent paroxysms possessed him, he would arrange bedroom chairs in a rude resemblance of a motor car, and would crouch on the foremost of them, bent forward and staring fixedly ahead, making uncouth and ghastly noises until the climax was reached, when, turning a complete somersault, he would lie prostrate amidst the ruin of the chairs, apparently completely satisfied for the moment. As time passed, however, these painful seizures grew gradually less frequent, and his friends strove to divert his mind into fresh channels. But his interest in other matters did not seem to revive, and he grew apparently languid and depressed. Very much like someone on a bit of a come-down.
Absolutely.
They're always somersaulting.
So it's interesting that the characters as anthropomorphic animals do retain some of their animalistic abilities.
Yeah. And there's also... But contrary to that, one of the oddest things about Toad is right at the end, there's a line where he's getting ready for a party and he combs and washes his hair.
God, that messed me up a little bit.
Just try and picture that.
Picture him with hair.
All this long, we've had Mr. Toad, and then suddenly he combs and washes his hair.
I'm glad you brought that up and made me seriously uncomfortable with the character of Toad.
It is weird, isn't it?
It's very weird. So we've got Toad, and then the last one must be Badger.
Yeah.
My personal favourite character.
Quite a scary one.
But...
an intimidating character.
Intimidating, but not scary,
No,
I'd say.
not scary.
Because I think... So if you've got Moley as a sort of audience insert recluse finding his way in the world. You've got Ratty as a sort of debonair, easygoing, in control of his situation, man of leisure. Toad, addictive, compulsive. Badger just wants to be left alone. But the few friends that he has, he would do anything for.
Including taking Toad to one side and telling him this is why I said he was scary. I'll tell you some facts about yourself. Come into the room. Come into this room, Toad, and I'll tell you some facts about yourself.
Yeah.
I live in fear of someone saying that.
I think that sounds like an actual intervention.
Yeah.
So yeah, where does the
final link to amongst the characters? Who does this sound like? I think this is Mole talking, but you can tell from Badger's reaction that he agrees. Once well underground, he said, you know exactly where you are. Nothing can happen to you, and nothing can get at you. You're entirely your own master, and you don't have to consult anybody or mind what they say. Things go on all the same overhead, and you let 'em, and don't bother about 'em. When you want to, up you go, and there things are, waiting for you. The Badger simply beamed on him.
Yeah. I think that's...
It's a bit Nemo-y, isn't it?
It's a bit Nemo-y, but Badger and Mole definitely have some similar interests in how they like to live their lives.
They're in the underground gang.
Yeah.
Cool, so that's our 4 characters.
Those are 4 characters.
Do you want to play a quick game? I know it's one of the serious episodes and we don't do games.
Oh, we've got a quiz.
We usually keep it for file papers. Well, it's a family belief that it is possible to characterise anyone you meet by ascribing to them Badger, Mole, Toad or Rat. And so I was going to throw a few familiar names at you and see if we draw the same conclusions.
Okay.
Ned Land.
Ooh.
Who is the Canadian harpoonist from 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea.
That's a Ratty.
Ratty?
Oh, no, that's a Toad.
Oh, interesting.
I think
I've put Craven and Obvious Mole.
Really?
Yeah. I thought, because this is the interesting thing about the game, is it throws surprising... Because all he does is want to be back on land.
But he also has a distinct obsession with harpooning in the same way. But it's a
single obsession.
That's true.
In the same way that Mole wants adventure, but also wants it to stop when it gets too much. And Ned Land sort of wants adventure for the first 30 seconds of 20,000 Leagues. And anyway,
next one.
Dr. Johnson.
Dr. Johnson is that's a Badger.
Correct. That's what I put. Yeah. Not correct.
Correct.
Mr. Pickwick.
Mr. Pickwick.
I think this was the hardest one.
Mr. Pickwick's a Ratty.
I thought Ratty. I went, in the end, a subtle Toad.
A subtle Toad?
Yeah.
I'd have said he was a Ratty.
Because he does flit.
He does flit, but he always does seem to appear in control.
Yeah. But he's not. But he gets undone. He also ends up in prison.
That's true, he does. He has a lot more in common with Toad now that you think about it.
But anyway,
next.
Last one. Second last one. Nemo.
Nemo's a Badger.
Well, I put Badger trying to be a rat. He is a Badger in the eyes of from the reader's perspective. But if you took him on his own word and saw him in his own world,
he's a Badger.
He's a rat in his own world.
A rat in his own.
He's the helpful, debonair master of ceremonies.
But all he wants to do is burrow underground and be left alone.
Ultimately, he's a Badger. Boswell's definitely rat. Well, I put Toad trying to be a rat. I have a feeling what you told me about him. Because if reading the book we read, the journals, he comes across completely as a rat.
Mm-hmm. But in his private life,
bit of a Toad. It's a disaster. And also with the amount of books that he drops that he's writing that he never completes.
Compulsive obsessive. I feel like we're playing two very separate games, though.
Yeah, I suppose. Anyway, that's that game.
Played
at home, and if nothing else, this was a subtle advert for all those previous episodes, which you haven't listened to. Go and check out. Male companionship, Adam. It's back, and it means business.
And once again, we pick a book that we didn't quite realise was as related to the others.
It's quite as heavy on the male companionship as this is. It's an odd one, though, because even though it's quite clearly male companionship, it's also sexless.
Wind of the Willows is a sexless world.
I think Kenneth Grahame actually said it's got nothing dirty or sex related in it.
No, not even close.
Like that. But the friends look out for each other in a way that's very, very tender.
Yeah.
But also a little intrusive. Like the intervention, which, Toad is... They stage an intervention on Toad when he is spending lots of his money. Mm-hmm. And I suppose endangering his life, but it doesn't feel like he's going to kill himself.
He has ended up in hospital a couple of times with the motor racing.
Does he end up in hospital?
I think he ends up in hospital. So I think there is...
Oh, yes, because... sorry to interrupt, but there's that line about... Mole says to him, "See, you'll get away from all those hospitals, and you'll never have to put up with any female nurses." And that's one of the only references to women.
Yeah,
we've picked another one with no reference to women. There are a couple of women in it, but
well, there's the jailer's daughter.
Jailer's daughter. There's also the washerwoman, the barge woman. His housekeeper.
Yeah.
By him, Toad's housekeeper gets one mention. We never see her.
Yeah. Well, there's these. I don't know what kind of story Kenneth Grahame was trying to write for his child. I don't know if it was meant to have a moral or a message, or if it was just meant to be an immersive story told in an immersive world. Because I think it's impossible for an author to not imprint a little bit of their own life experience into their work.
Yes.
So I think that...
And I think even harder when you haven't got a lot of work.
Yes. I think that the way I read it, before you telling me that it was evolved out of letters to his son, I had assumed it was a sort of commentary on England.
I think that's how people have read it.
Yeah.
But I mean, see, I say even less when it's only one thing they've written, but actually what I mean by that is that it's more likely that we'll think that if they've only written one thing. We'll take it as autobiography, and it's maybe unfair, but from what I read of Kenneth Grahame, he's not like other authors in that I think he quite openly... He wrote about this childhood house he lived at. I think it was in Scotland. I've forgotten the name of it. But parents had quite a troubled life and marriage, and he ended up being taken away from it, and that became the focus of all of his nostalgia. And he said something like, "Oh, you know, the countryside never was quite the same. They're just a few poor acres now.
Yeah.
Whereas there, it was all sort of this permanent, sunny Eden."
Well, shall we talk about English pastoral writing?
Hang on one sec, because I want to talk about food, but we'll get on to that.
Brilliant.
I just want to... there's a really weird bit. Just on the male companionship thing. I mean, it's hard not to read Rat and Mole as an elderly couple.
They read to me like two old friends who've been friends forever.
Yeah.
And one wouldn't quite know what to do without the other. Each of them leans on the other to make up for deficiencies in their own character. Yeah,
perhaps both widowed, if they're not in a relationship themselves.
It's Molly with his obsessive cleaning strikes me as someone who's not been left on their own for a while. I wonder, it clearly wasn't the intention, but why, if all we know of his character, did he suddenly decide to leave then and now? The whole lifetime of no compulsive action taken, why then, but...
Because... Oh, we'll get to that. But Rat also has a breakdown, if it is a breakdown at first from Mole, but we'll get onto that. I just wanted to read this bit because it's... Mole makes a fool of himself by overturning the boat quite early on. But the Rat kindly looked in the other direction, away from his tears, and presently the Mole's spirits revived again, and he was even able to give some straight back talk to a couple of moorhens who were sniggering to each other about his bedraggled appearance.
I got a final say on the water rat and water vole thing. They're the same thing.
Oh.
A water rat's just another name for a water vole.
So he is a water vole.
But a water vole is a water rat.
But a water vole is known as a water rat.
Yes.
Ah, well, that kind of makes sense. You were right.
And you were right too. How lovely.
Yeah, okay. Well done us.
Well done us.
Now shall we open the luncheon hamper?
Speaking of food.
Yeah, let's get into
what another book we've chosen with decadent descriptions of...
I know. So there's the quite famous luncheon hamper where Moley ends up having to scream like "Stop!" It's like we've got cold tongue, cold beef, cold ham. It revolves very Boswell and Johnson like about food to food.
Well, there's the descriptions of the meals served at Toad Hall.
There's a little when Ratty and Moley return to Moley's burrow, and there's a little bit of a sly, I think, quite bitchy air about Ratty. He sort of says,
some judgments.
"What a lovely little house, so compact, so well planned." It's like someone who's sort of saying,
"You've got quite a small house, haven't you, Moley?"
Yeah, but you've got a figure that actually hides a few extra pounds. But
that suit's so well tailored, you almost couldn't tell.
But again, what does this sound like? Speaking of Nebland, this is Toad on his adventures, and he swaps a horse for a couple of shillings and some breakfast. He tilted up the pot, and a glorious stream of hot, rich stew gurgled into the plate. It was indeed the most beautiful stew in the world, being made of, get this, partridges and pheasants and chickens and hares and rabbits and peahens and guinea fowls and one or two other things.
Beautiful.
I mean, not only excessive amount of multiple animals, but also ethically a bit curious.
It is interesting.
Because we could meet Mr. Hare, Mr. Pheasant, Mr. Guinea Fowl.
Well,
in fact, we do meet rabbits.
None of the of the main characters, the only one who's a predator is Badger.
Yeah, toads shouldn't really eat pheasants.
Toads not normally aren't large enough to get a pheasant down.
No. Or have hair. I mean, maybe toads that eat pheasants grow hair.
Well, this is something that has to be looked into.
Yeah, we'll get in touch with the family.
Maybe by another podcast.
Yeah. But yes, there's a lot of joyous food writing. Kenneth Grahame said in that same quote about, there's nothing dirty about it and there's no second meaning. It's just an expression of the simplest joys in life.
Food, friendship. Reclaiming your property from an army of woodland creatures.
I don't quite believe him, though, and we'll get on to why. But there's a bit more. It wouldn't stand the test of time if it was just, I love food and friendship.
Yeah.
And the songs, delightful songs.
Oh, yes.
Uptails all.
Yep.
Incidentally, do you sing when you read?
I think...
Can you stop yourself?
With this particular book, the songs from the adaptations are so imprinted in my mind that I would just hear that.
You just hear them, yeah.
I'd have to think a little bit more carefully about if it was in another...
Do you generally sing when you read? I found it really hard. I noticed that I sang a lot.
I will look for... If there's an obvious rhythm, I think I will sing.
Out loud?
In my head. But I think, yeah. It doesn't even have to be what's on the page, or just sing.
Just sing.
Because I remember the first time I read... I keep talking about The Hobbit today, but when I first spoke about The Hobbit and they have Thorin's song about the Misty Mountains, I think that was another one that was so firmly lodged in my head by the radio adaptation that we used to listen to.
That you couldn't not.
That I couldn't not, yeah.
I tend to try and make up a tune, even the carol in this.
Yeah.
I couldn't remember if they'd used it fully in the adaptation that I used to watch as a kid, which is an amazing stop motion, which I should have looked up the name of the director so people could watch it.
It's interesting that we both watched distinctly different adaptations.
Yeah, so yours was what?
Mine's was hand-drawn animation.
Hand-drawn animation, okay, yeah. Mine's stop.
It's almost like watercolour, actually. It was it was kind of like Watership Down.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Very beautiful.
What was that other... We're going way off topic, but what was that wild animal animated series? It was about a wood. The animals of...
Farthing Wood?
Farthing Wood, yeah. That was Does it look like that?
It looked a bit more like... They animated some of the Beatrix Potters.
Okay.
And it looked a little bit like that. Very low movement. And when the movement moved, they blurred, kind of like watercolour. It's a very interesting style, and probably done as cost saving. Yeah, but it worked really, really well. I remember specifically the opening. There's some like bulrushes that fade out to Molly and Ratty on their barge, but it was really beautiful. And I would love to rediscover it. Actually,
maybe we should do a live podcast where we rewatch.
Do a riff tracks of The Wind and the Willows.
Do a DVD commentary. Yeah, because I'm sure they'll be selling loads of them at the moment.
I bet we could sell one.
The Year Read This, Wind in the Willows commentary for both animated versions.
Thanks, Mum.
Yeah. But it's the same. It's that when I remember that one, and I haven't seen it in years and years and years, you remember certain... the nostalgia of Kenneth Grahame's kind of come full circle, because I remember certain, like, the satisfaction of how the snowdrifts look.
Oh, yeah.
Or the way that... Because I don't think any of the animated animals had hair in the same way that some stop motion actually animate hair. Yeah, they just had sculpted stuff, and the satisfaction of that.
I feel like this personal nostalgia that each of us has, probably universal, is part of the enduring success of Wind in the Willows. Everybody, even if everyone hasn't read it, it's one of those ones where the story is basically universally known. You know the characters just by looking at them as well. Yeah. I think it's definitely one of the better examples of archetypal writing. Yeah. At least from that time.
And yet we should, usually my instincts are like tell you to guard yourself against nostalgia. And I think it probably didn't work out very well personally for Kenneth Grahame, but it created this.
But for the enduring success of his estate, I think that
it was worth it.
Wind in the Willows is pure nostalgia.
Did I mention that the original title was Wind in the Reeds?
I thought
Not
it was
half as good, is it? Not half as evocative.
Was there not another? Was it not called something else as well, like Whistling Willows or something?
Oh, I don't know.
I have a feeling
Wind
it went
in the Reeds is a book of poems by Yeats.
Okay.
And so that's why I didn't call it Wind in the Reeds. But if you notice,
Wind in the Willows
when
is
you
much
read it,
better alliteration as well.
much better.
But Bull Reeds, the Reeds turn up a lot more than the Willows. Yeah.
Well, yeah, no, there's I think at least 2 times where wind is whistling through the reeds. So he was clearly focused on that
the Reeds,
title.
yeah.
I wonder when he was told, no, you can't have it. So let's describe the kind of world that has the wind running through the willows.
It is English pastoral. It is the
English and microscopic.
Microscopic. So it's a microcosm of England as an acre of countryside. It's like the 100-acre wood. It's an idealized version of the cover of an English pastoral book in the 1910s. It looks like a painting of a farm scene. Mm-hmm. All of these things are the feeling that Wind in the Willows evokes, where it's the river, the house.
Yep.
It's very small, but every detail of it is perfect and trimmed with nostalgia as well. They're probably nostalgic for this even back in the 1910s.
Yeah, there's no work. It may be unfair to call Toad idle, because all of them are idle.
All of them are idle. Well, some of them have jobs. The washerwoman has a job.
Yeah, but she's human.
Yeah.
We'll get to. I'm coming to humans very quickly.
Okay.
But, no bank, just a riverbank. And yet they have a strange sense of duty because they tell Toad he's wasting his time. But Badger
What else would he be doing?
sleeps for half of the year. Mole just tidies the same sort of
small,
tiny little burrow.
Compact house.
And Rat composes doggerel and eats fine wine and eats cheese and fine wine.
I think. Oh God, these are all very hot takes.
Yeah,
but I feel like
with a book published in 1908, they could not be hot.
Strike while the iron is frozen.
Yeah.
It's an idealized look at life, of a certain kind of life of a certain time. Mm-hmm. English countryside life. The kind of life that I think Kenneth Grahame, having moved from a city working into a bank to the countryside, was probably looking for.
Yeah. And it's peaceful, but there is danger out there. There's a strange kind of etiquette. A few times it comes up, but he knew from animal etiquette that you something like you don't dwell on trouble ahead.
It's like the sort of law of the forest.
It's also a bit like the rule of English repression.
Yes.
Don't talk about trouble. Keep
your head down.
Keep your head down. Don't show your emotions.
It'll be fine.
Everything will revolve around having a nice time, getting to dinner on time.
Yes. The sun will come up tomorrow.
Sun will come up tomorrow, even if you live in a burrow.
Also, I don't know if we're going to get to this now or later, but God turns up at one point as well.
Oh, we will get to that, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, because that kind of turns this whole bit on its head.
Yeah.
So outside of this safe little pastoral heaven, there is the wild wood. Ratty says, beyond the wild wood comes the wide world. I've never going to that. I've never been and I'm never going. Don't refer to it again, please.
Is that a comment on English isolationism?
Quite possibly, but if so, it also seems to be kind of how Kenneth Grahame felt.
I'm assuming the way he felt was probably how a lot of people felt at the turn of the century.
We're risking a completely biographical reading here, but
we are.
It's possible that he on one hand felt that, and on another thought that was short-sighted.
Because the wild wood is full of known danger, but the wider world is full of unknown danger. So I'm assuming it's a sort of devil kind of a attitude to their world.
Yes, yeah. I don't know why I've written this down here, but incidentally, it's the third book we've talked about to feature otters. Oh. So just in case we've run out of steam on slightly picaresque male companionship adventure novels and Edinburgh things, we can claim, actually, I'll cut this out.
It was otters the entire time.
I won't let them hear this. Really, we've just been doing otter books. We do get this strange cameo from the outside world that I mentioned earlier, this sea rat that comes to visit and precipitates a kind of breakdown in Ratty, which is weird. But I just thought I'd describe this bit because it's more food. And basically, this sea rat rocks up and says, it starts telling, boring Ratty with his life, and then demands to be fed. And then when Ratty says, "Yeah, come round, I'll make you some supper," like going the extra mile for a stranger, he says, "Oh, just bring it out here if you would."
Yeah.
Which is, I didn't like to see that. It's an excellent suggestion, says the water rat, who just bends over, and hurried off home. There he got out the luncheon basket and packed a simple meal, in which, remembering the stranger's origin and preferences, he took care to include a yard of long French bread, a sausage, out of which the garlic sang, some cheese which lay down and cried, and a long-necked, straw-covered flask wherein lay bottled sunshine, shed and garnered on far southern slopes. Thus laden, he returned with all speed and blushed for pleasure at the old seaman's commendations of his taste and judgment.
For a man who's never written before, Kenneth Grahame really knew how to write.
Incidentally, have you ever made a rat blush?
Is it possible? Would you have to shave it first?
We'll leave that there. So after that, he has a breakdown. I think Ratty, who's all been... don't go beyond the wild wood. I'm never going out to the wide world. He sort of has this weird dazed moment after the sea rat leaves. He could be just drunk. But Moley comes back and he says his eyes weren't his eyes anymore and he was ranting and raving, and then they actually kind of wrestle. He seems to have a kind of fit.
Could it be the idea that... Is it regret?
Yeah, I think maybe. He's been so stubbornly against ever leaving his riverbank, and I think
the sea rat turns up and tells him everything about all the amazing things there are out there.
Yeah.
Kind of, it's the... There's probably a better phrase for it. There's a sort of like the Carl Pilkington effect. When they did Idiot Abroad, they took a man with very simple pleasures and showed him the wide world. And at the end of that first season of Idiot Abroad, they took him like down the normal caravan holiday he did, and he just didn't enjoy it anymore because he's like, it's just not much, is it, compared to the Great Wall of China or India? It's like they've taken a man of very simple pleasures,
shown
him the world he didn't want to see, and now he can never go back.
And now he doesn't have a rat's eyes anymore, and he's being wrestled by a mole. You were talking about his writing. Mm-hmm. He seems to have a real liking for anthropomorphizing the landscape.
Yes.
So flowers sort of go and look at their reflection. Mm-hmm. He really likes purple loosestrife. He refers to that a few times. But this is my favourite. The reserved rustic road was presently joined by a shy little brother in the shape of a canal, which took its hand and ambled along it by its side in perfect confidence, but with the same tongue-tied, uncommunicative attitude towards strangers.
It's really nice.
That comes out of nowhere. It's lovely, isn't it?
It's really nice, but it gives you that exact feeling of a sort of unplanned but perfect countryside.
Yeah.
Like it's not curated or landscaped. It's just the way it is, and it's perfect like that.
It also has it makes everything a character or a spirit.
I think the countryside is as much a character as the other four.
But you could almost be like, that's the road, that's the river, and it behaves this way today.
Yeah.
So humans.
Humans.
Weird.
What role do humans have in this world?
It's baffling.
What size are they compared to the animals?
That's a good place to start.
Yeah.
Well, clearly they're the same size because Toad wears the clothes of a human.
Yep. Well, they all wear the clothes of a human.
I mean, literally a clothes he borrows off a human.
Oh, yeah.
He could, I mean, in an animal world, I guess he could have like an animal tailor. Which animal would be the tailor, do you think?
Oh, what was the, who was the tailor in the Beatrix Potter? It was a mouse.
Mouse, yeah. It would be mice that flow all over you.
Let's talk about BoJack Horseman.
Okay.
in BoJack Horseman, acclaimed Netflix animated TV show.
Not a sponsor.
Not a sponsor. Half of the population of the world are anthropomorphic animals, and it's never touched on.
Yeah.
Like, it's not important. Half of them are animals. It's a base for animal puns and visual gags. You know, octopuses have jumpers that have 8 armholes. It doesn't matter. This is a world that has half animals. Is it the same in Wind of the Willows? There are some animals and there are some humans. It doesn't matter.
No, I don't think it is. There's a weird... The only bit that comes close, you would think, to describing the history of it is Badger makes a reference to the fact that his burrow network used to be a city of humans, but it's long gone.
I love that idea.
And it's kind of, I know it sounds like Roman ruins, basically. But, I mean, that would make more sense if there were no humans around and we assumed that this was some kind of post-human New Eden.
But the humans are there.
But humans are there. And
there's not even any sort of aggression either.
well, no, there is.
Oh, God, no,
there's an odd moment where Ratty and Mole are walking through. They have to come back through a town implicitly of humans. And Rat says, "Don't worry, we'll they're all safely indoors at this time of year. We won't suffer any unpleasantness. We'll slip through unnoticed."
Unpleasantness.
Just odd, isn't it?
Do the human?
And they refer to their dogs as well.
That's so strange. That's like a Goofy and Pluto thing, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, we could try and figure it out. Like there's a proper answer. It could be inconsistency.
I think we've spent more time thinking about it than Kenneth Grahame probably did.
Perhaps, yeah.
I think he thought of the animals and the humans as different aspects of humans. And when he had to write around issues, he wrote it from the perspective of a human, where if animals had to go through some humans, they'd be thinking about their dogs and being bothered by the humans.
Yeah.
But that's only when they encroached into the animals' world. You know? I don't think it's not important to the plot, but it is a strange inconsistency. Why not make them all animals? Why not make them all humans?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it might just be too tiresome. Unlike BoJack Horseman, where you can make the editor of Penguin a penguin, and it's an easy visual gag, and it requires no words. Yeah. Every time a judge came up, he would have to say a judge who was a caribou. It would get fiddly, I guess. Easier for a judge just to be a judge. The most direct human-animal interaction is the toad and the niece of a washerwoman in jail. And there's one bit where, because she takes a liking to Toad and tries to let him escape, and Toad feels this growing tenderness towards her and begins to regret the social gulf between them.
Oh my God!
And it's weird because you start thinking, well, is that the social gulf between humans and animals because she's way above you, or is it because you're Toad of Toad Hall
and she's a washerwoman's niece? Honestly, I'm going to assume it was the class.
I think it's the class.
If it's a book written in Britain, it's probably going to be the class.
It's probably class, yeah. And just to confuse things more before we leave the hierarchy, Toad has a horse. I'll leave that there.
I want a moment on that actually. I recently read into why Goofy walks around wearing clothes and Pluto is Mickey's dog.
Yeah.
And there is an actual reason for it. There is a type of cartoon character, and they're called funny animals. Capital F, capital A. And funny animals are animals that are cartoon-like.
Yeah.
Pluto is a funny animal. Or is it? No, Goofy is a funny animal where there are dogs, but Goofy's a funny animal dog.
Yeah.
So it's like they're two completely separate things. And I think that's how Disney have sort of sidestepped the Pluto seems to be entirely okay with his own subservience. Maybe it's a kink thing. Who knows?
Well, with Disney, I'd assumed it was just a racist thing. Piper at the Gates of Dawn.
Why does God turn up in this book?
So we've skirted over lots of elements of the book. I assume most people are going to be familiar with them. If you haven't read Wind in the Willows, or you just haven't read it in ages, you might have actually forgotten this bizarre little episode that comes towards the end of the book, but frankly, you could drop it in anywhere because it's completely
so
self-contained.
It's almost like a short story.
Yeah, it is. Grahame was into paganism. It's a good place to start. He's a neo-pagan. And there is one explicit reference to kind of pagan practice, possibly, in when Ratty goes with his brace of pistols to rescue Mole from the wild wood. He says, when you come into the wild wood, you shouldn't just blunder in like this. You need to learn these passwords and mutter these verses and travel with certain plants in your pocket.
Yes.
Basically sounds kind of...
Very pagan.
Very pagan.
But with paganism come pagan gods. And with pagan gods comes the god Pan turning up in Wind in the Willows.
Yeah.
Which I'd completely forgotten about.
So Otter has lost his child, we are told. Yep. He's gone... AWOL. And Mole and Ratty...
Absent without Otter leave.
Mole and Ratty go on his boat to go and search the river to try and find him. And they start hearing this beautiful and painful music. it's so beautiful, it's painful, and enter this sort of kind of trance where they follow the music and find the god Pan
Yep.
sheltering the little otter, and then they kneel
Yep.
and worship Pan. The otter is left with them, and he's vanished, and they forget. But the most interesting thing is, as soon as it's over, they forget it, and they drift off. And because it would be too terrible to remember how magical a moment it was, it's like
it's such a strange inclusion in this children's book. This is when we have to start talking about Kenneth Grahame saying there's no secondary meaning to anything in this book.
Yeah. I think it's the most astonishing bit in the book. It's if, say, since we were talking about humans, if Mr. Toad, Mr. Mole, Mr. Badger were all people with animal names, and their entire lives, which with the exception of Toad they do, revolve around staying safe, having meals on time, friendship, we would write this off as tedious, kind of depressing English isolationism. These lives that revolve around such trivial
very
things.
basic needs. Yeah.
What this bit does is remind you of the fact that when they're so kind of moved by this, and this, it just comes across like a description of a moment in life which just makes everything seem beautiful
as well.
Yeah, and defies description. What makes it moving though is that because they're rats and badgers and toads and not just a mister, that reminds you that every time you hear badger, you think badger cull or rat trap, or mole skin, and it means something that they always want to be safe.
Yeah.
I mean, we don't see them constantly trapped. There's these hints, but we don't see them sort of treated like they're treated in the real world. But that moment kind of made me think about it, and I think if that had just been a moment of a dazzling vision given to just 4 English blokes, it wouldn't have meant much. If Mr. Pickwick had that moment, it would have been anomalous.
But it would have been very in line with Dickens sort of shoehorning his own stuff into the middle of his fiction.
Yeah, but it wouldn't have meant half as much, I don't think.
No, it wouldn't have. I'm still thinking about why it was there. When I first read it, I was like, this is so out of place. I can't. It's like Buddha turning up in a Mr. Man book. But it's like the more
Mr. Sit.
Mr. Strong speaks in tongues. But I see it. I think it's very connected to writing about the idealized countryside.
Yeah, I think he felt that I haven't put it strong enough.
Yeah, because if Thomas Hardy writes about the countryside and how godly it is and how it's a creation of God and it's paradise on earth. What do I mean then? More like a kind of like the countryside, the English countryside of this type and of this, the way it's written is a sort of heavenly vision.
Yeah.
The idea that if Kenneth Grahame, as someone who's interested in paganism, has inserted a god into his book, I think it's just to round off that vision of this being almost otherworldly or divine. Yeah,
I think specifically Pan was a bit in fashion, but I think really for Pan, read nature.
Yeah,
and the point is to because I mean there's even a capitalized him. We shall. I'm not afraid of him, says Ratty, I think, and then he says, "Oh, but I am afraid."
Yeah,
and so it's very much saying this is a deity to worship, but I think it might as well be capital N nature.
Yeah,
as much as capital P Pan.
Well, but then that ties into what they were saying earlier about just the laws and the social norms and all this stuff of the forest and of nature.
Yeah,
things that all animals should be aware of.
Yeah, and they're not necessarily the one and only that, like we were talking about them earlier, but they are unities to respect, or kind of, I don't know, what spiritual properties almost.
Yeah,
respect the river.
Yeah,
or coexist with the river, the badger. The forest.
But then we need to talk about the one part of the book that doesn't coexist with nature, which is Toad Hall.
Yeah, Toad Hall and the plot of Toad, I suppose.
Toad lives unnaturally. Ratty lives in something in the riverbank.
He lives in style, but he lives on the riverbank.
Moley lives in a burrow. Badger lives in a set.
Bigger burrow.
Toad lives in a Georgian country house.
Yeah. Yeah.
With a kitchen, with a pantry, with a place for his place for his cars. And I think it's time to talk about Toad.
Yeah.
But I think the
time for the toad to come home.
Time for the toad to toad in the hole.
Yeah.
But it's the plot of this book, which we've masterfully avoided talking about,
is Toad.
Toad, the loss of Toad Hall and the recapture of Toad Hall from the denizens of the Wildwood.
And previously, the capture of the escape of Toad and the arrest of Toad and the adventures of Toad.
What's Toad doing? When Toad's not there, people should be asking, what's Toad doing?
When Toad's not there, it is pretty much picaresque.
Yeah.
And Pickwick-esque. It's
these two wandering about having their own
wandering about
adventures,
having jollies, you know,
Yeah.
and they do have. There is a plot with their changing perspectives on how insular you should be.
Do you want to do a plot summary then?
For Toad.
Yeah.
So Toad, when we first meet Toad, he's into gypsy caravanning.
Yep.
His gypsy caravan gets run down by a motor car. He sits in the middle of the road, staring at it. Ratty and Moley try and help him up, but his mind is elsewhere.
Yeah.
He has seen his new passion, poop, time to get into motor cars. We hear from a distance that he goes through a few.
Yes.
And crashes them or buys more, ends up in hospital, attended by horror of horrors, female nurses.
Yeah.
And then as Ratty and Mole continue their potterings, they end up in the Wild Wood. They meet Badger. They tell Badger, and Badger says, come spring, when I'm done sleeping, we'll go and stage an intervention.
Yeah.
They do. They lock him up. He escapes. Yep. He goes to a pub, and he steals a motor car, and then he is arrested, thrown in prison, escapes from prison dressed as a washerwoman, has a few other adventures, including that gypsy meal.
Yep.
Oh, and also that barge woman. There's a really funny moment where he ends up on a barge woman. He's still dressed up as a washerwoman, pretending that he can wash clothes, and he talks about his proficiency at washing and how brilliant he is at it. And the washerwoman says, I haven't had time to wash with that husband of mine who goes off with that dog of his who's even worse. That's another weird animal-human moment, because it's like, well, does that mean they're two mates, like a guy and a dog?
Yeah.
Or does that mean that he owns a dog and his dog is going like, come on, mate, since you got married to that bird, you've been so boring. Let's go.
You've been doing washing non-stop.
Yeah, come on, let's go tie one on.
Yeah.
Do a bit of speed or something.
Makes it back to Toad Hall.
Yes, makes it back to... No, he doesn't. He makes it back to Ratty's.
Oh, yes, because...
And Ratty says, terrible news for Toad. Toad Hall has been flooded with weasels.
It's been invaded by weasels.
And his friends, in the meantime, Mole and Badger, have been keeping a patrol and basically trying to keep the weasel invasion contained. I don't really know what the point is.
Implied guerrilla warfare with the weasels.
Yeah. But no gorillas.
No. There's some shockingly few jungle animals.
That would have been a great moment. It's sort of a typical hero's adventure, kind of.
Yeah.
Bit Plato-y, shedding off all of his bodily attachments and then returning with nothing.
Yeah.
And then he and his friends conquer Toad Hall, and he still has a couple of lessons to learn because he wants to throw a party and do lots of songs.
There's a little bit of Three Musketeers in there as well. Sort of daring do.
And the fight scene itself is it makes you wonder why they had to wait for Toad to come back, because they just trounce.
Yeah.
They basically walk into Toad Hall and
beat the crap.
Well, they go
out
through
of...
a secret tunnel, but apart from that,
the
they just beat everyone
weasel.
up. Yeah. And they get quite vicious as well.
Well, I think Bad Badger does most of the work.
Yeah. But Ratty tries to arm them all. You sort of see it like a heist movie montage, like a pistol for Rat, a pistol for Mole, a pistol for Badger, a pistol for Toad, a truncheon for Mole. And then Mole, when he goes into fight mode, there's a reference to him. He just shouts a mole, as he beats them up,
which must be terrifying.
Yeah, I know.
Imagine if you were in that situation, and your mind snapped and you just screamed, "Human, human,
Ash!" Yeah, that is odd.
Yeah.
But they learn them.
They learn them good, and back to the wildwood with them.
Back to the wildwood with the weasels.
Toad hole for toads.
Yeah, and so Toad learns the obvious lesson. He's told to, rein it in a bit.
Stop stealing cars.
I mean, it is a bit bittersweet because you do get the impression that he's basically forcing him. He doesn't feel like he, of his own accord, has decided to tone it down. He just agrees, and he becomes quite kind of, okay, I'll do whatever you like.
Well, here's a good time for me to just drop in my book recommendation of the of the week, which is a book called Counselling for Toads, which is a very weird and interesting book, which is a follow-up to Wind in the Willows, where Mr. Toad goes to therapy.
Yeah.
And it sounds like it shouldn't be half as good as it is.
I was going to say, don't say too much because it's so good. We could do an episode on it.
We could do an episode on it, and we may well. But until then, go get a hold of a copy of Counselling for Toads and read it, because there's nothing else quite like it. And if you like the idea of a character study of Mr. Toad, then it's pretty perfect. Yeah.
I just thought, just to wrap up, it's not just Toad who changes his ways. This is actually quite early on, but I think it's illustrative of the fact that Mole changes as well. As he hurried along, eagerly anticipating the moment when he would be at home again among the things he knew and liked, the Mole saw clearly that he was an animal of tilled field and hedgerow, linked to the ploughed furrow, the lane of evening lingerings, the cultivated garden plot. For others, the asperities, the stubborn endurance, or the clash of actual conflict that went with nature in the rough. He must be wise, must keep to the pleasant places in which his lines were laid and which held adventure enough in their way to last for a lifetime.
I think that sums up the entire ethos of Wind in the Willows.
Yeah.
Which is, it might be all rough and tumble out there, but this is our own little corner of nature, and we can enjoy it as we see fit.
And whilst we can.
Yeah.
It was a bit of a grim end for Grahame. He had a quite loveless marriage himself, but quite like his parents. I think his wife was a kind of chronic hypochondriac.
Okay.
And his son, Mouse, had a kind of rough childhood. I think he was half blind, and he had some behavioural issues. So he used to do things like go and lie out in the street until cars came to make them stop. And whilst I think he went to university, and whilst there, he said he didn't want to be called Alistair Grahame anymore. He wanted to be called something Robinson, the name of the person who shot at his father.
Oh, God.
So those letters with all the content, really, of Wind in the Willows go from my dearest Mouse to my dearest Robinson. I can't remember the first name, James Robinson or anything. And eventually he killed himself.
Good God.
Quite young, like 20. And I think that signalled the sort of end of Graham's writing.
That is, I had no idea there was such a tragic backstory behind Wind in the Willows.
Yeah.
Well, we're all better off for it existing.
Yeah. Sorry, I don't want to end on a.
Oh no, same with a bittersweet end to Wind in the Willows, bittersweet end to the podcast.
But to wrap up then, why, in brief, would we recommend Wind in the Willows?
Because it's good. Because there's nothing else quite like it. There's not a lot of enduring children's writing from that period.
True.
And this has probably survived because it's the best.
And it's surprising as well. Rereading it, there really is quite a lot. It's not just the Piper at the Gates of Dawn. The style has its eccentricities and
no one writes the countryside like Kenneth Grahame.
No. Well, read that.
Read that.
We will be back.
Poop poop.
Poop poop. We'll be back in a nice new motor car as we
crashing directly into a ditch.
Crashing straight into a pond. Thank you for listening.
Thank you.
Poop poop.
Poop poop.